What's up, Powerlifting Nation? Today I'm going to talk about how to grow the sport of powerlifting. However, I could talk about this topic for ages, so I am going to talk about a small subsection, which is how to grow the sport of powerlifting through athlete selection to the World Championships. I think we can make big improvements in this small section of powerlifting. But first of all, I want to say that a lot of powerlifters believe that powerlifting is destined to be a niche sport. And they do have a point. I mean, their argument is that the meets simply aren't interesting enough to kind of get viewers to watch meets who aren't heavily invested powerlifters. And this is because meets are, 4 hours, 5 hours long. And usually, apart from Sheffield, I would say, usually in each flight, there's maybe 1 or 2 lifters that we are, as viewers, invested in. And the rest of the flight, I mean, I couldn't care less about what they are doing. For example, when I'm watching some big events, maybe even like a national event or a world championship event, usually I'll just skip through a lot of the lifters because I don't care, and I'll be waiting to watch a big lifter lift, you know? So I do understand their point, and they believe that powerlifting can grow to a certain extent. However, powerlifting overall is capped because it's just too boring and too niche. And yeah, I think they have a point, but I think that they are looking at the negatives, and I don't think this is useful. For example, if we look at sports like Test cricket, golf, chess, darts, these sports all have clear negatives. We can think of the negatives. However, these sports have grown massively and they are able to have full-time athletes. They have massive viewerships, and so I think that instead of looking at the negatives, us powerlifters should look at the positives. And I think that there is one key positive, and this positive is that powerlifting is one of the most relatable sports in the world. What do I mean? Well, pretty much, I would say 50% of the population, if not more, of the world have tried a squat, bench, or deadlift at least once, which means people can relate to what it feels like to do like a 60 kilogram bench press. People can relate to this. And I think that this is quite rare. I mean, I would say the only sports that have such a big relatability factor is probably basketball and football. Everyone has tried to do basketball. Everyone has tried to do football. But other than that, I would put powerlifting behind basketball and football. I mean, it's interesting. Everyone has tried to do a squat, bench, and deadlift. But powerlifting isn't just relatable. It is also impressive to the general population. I mean, when I do let's say a 600-pound squat in the gym, everyone is interested. Everyone is interested in it. It's not just powerlifters that are impressed by heavy numbers being lifted. Everyone is interested. And so I think that we should, instead of looking at the negatives of the sport, meets are boring, we should focus on the positives. We are very relatable. We have people doing insane things. We have the strongest people in the world lifting. We should take advantage of this advantage and really just keep pushing to try and grow the sport, because our athletes have tried so hard, they work so hard to get to the top, and they just don't get the recognition they deserve. So I think that we should keep pushing to grow the sport. And how are we going to keep pushing to grow the sport? By making small changes in order to make the sport more accessible and more entertaining. Now here's where we talk about the IPF Worlds selection process. So right now, IPF Worlds is relatively boring. Why? Well, let's say you were forced to watch the whole of IPF Worlds, the whole week, every single flight. You would be very bored throughout most of the time. Yes, there would be some sections that were very interesting, but most of the time it wouldn't be very interesting. And why is this? Well, in most weight classes, there is only about 1 or 2 lifters that are kind of worthy of us watching. I mean, there are 1 or 2 lifters that could win it, and everyone else, they don't really have a chance of winning. If we look at the men's class, the 93s is one of those ones that is very interesting to watch. We have about 4 people that could win, and that's good. We may watch 4 of those lifters, skip through the other 4, but we've got 4 lifters to watch, so it's worth watching the full meet. However, if we look at the 83s, that is the case. If we look at the 120s, that will be the case. However, the rest of the classes, the 120 plus, Jesus is definitely going to win. The 105s, Anthony McNaughton is definitely going to win. The 74s, Austin Perkins is going to win. The 66s, Zhao Backlund is going to win. The 59s, Wasker is going to win. So half of the weight classes, even in the A flights, it's only worth watching one person, and it's not even worth watching that person because they are going to win with ease. There is no kind of chance of them losing. So overall, I would argue IPF Worlds is boring. However, how can we fix it? Well, the ideal situation would be that IPF Worlds is like Sheffield. The reason why Sheffield is so good is because, or one of the reasons, is because every single individual at Sheffield, or almost every single individual, has a chance of winning. So it's worth watching every single individual. And that's what would be the ideal situation at the World Championships. And ideally, in at least the A flight, so all of the 8 lifters in the A flight, ideally there would be a chance that every single lifter won. For example, if we even look at the 100-meter sprint, imagine if Usain Bolt was competing, but instead of the races being reasonably close, let's say he was guaranteed to win by 1 second each time. After a few meets, it would be very boring to watch. You would be like, we know what's going to happen. There is no chance of him losing. Why watch it? The reason why it's so interesting is because every single runner could win if Usain Bolt slipped up, or if they had a really good race. Every single runner had a chance. It's close throughout the race, and so it's exciting. And that's what we ideally want to see at IPF Worlds. Every single lifter has a chance of winning, and so we're invested in every single lifter, exactly what they're doing. And we saw a glimpse of this at the Powerlifting America National Championships. In the 83 kilogram class, in the 93 kilogram class, the bench press, which is seen as the most boring part of a meet, even the bench press was extremely exciting because we knew that every single kilogram that was put on during the bench press was going to be the difference between winning and losing. That's why it was so interesting. So yeah, ideally we would have every single one of the A classes filled out with lifters that could win. And yes, you could argue that in some weight classes that is literally impossible because we have outliers in this weight class. For example, if we look at the 74s, realistically, Austin Perkins is the only person that can win IPF Worlds. So yeah, you can argue that that's the case. However, in some weight classes, there is a possibility that in a different kind of rule book, we could see more competitive lifters in the event. For example, in the 93s, right now we have Gustav Hedlund, Emil Krastev and Jonathan Kaiko going to the World Championships who have a chance of winning the event. So we're going to watch all of those 3. However, there is a world where we could have Gavin Aiden, Brandon Petrie, even Russell Orhi, Dominique Fuqua, Demetrius Smith. There is a world where we could have all of these lifters filling out the flight and every single lifter had a chance of winning and it would be just insane to watch. However, for some reason the rulebook at IPF Worlds is flawed and we don't get to see all of the top lifters compete. And this is because currently the rules are that each nation is allowed to bring 8 lifters to the World Championships. So in nations like in the USA, particularly the USA, they have a lot of top lifters that could be extremely competitive. But because the USA can only bring 1 lifter per weight class, we only get to see 1 lifter from America compete. Some weight classes have 3 or 4 lifters that have a chance of winning the World Championships if they had a chance to go. And so I think the rule book has to change. So I made a video 2 weeks ago saying IPF Worlds is boring, and I offered a solution. And this solution was that the best team at the previous year's World Championships get more lifters that they can bring to the World Championships. For example, the USA won best male open team at last year's World Championships, and so instead of being able to bring 8 lifters, we could argue that they are allowed to bring 15 lifters, let's say. And so we would get to see in the top nations more top lifters being able to compete. The main reason why I like this solution was because it doesn't really change the system a lot. Right now we have a system where nations have a lot of autonomy when choosing which 8 lifters to bring to the World Championships. And so by increasing that number when teams do good in the team points, this kind of autonomy by nations remains the same. And so the IPF wouldn't have to do much to implement this rule. And that's why I like this rule, because the IPF doesn't seem to like to do a lot of massive changes, especially changes which mean that they are going to have to do more admin. So I like this solution because it allows the best teams to bring more lifters, allowing us to have a more competitive IPF Worlds without there being a lot of kind of stress on the IPF end. However, under this video, a lot of people were offering a different solution, which I do like. This is that anyone that lifts within a certain percentage of the world record in their weight class should be invited to IPF Worlds. And I really like this. Why? Because we automatically would get the very best of the best competing at the World Championships. If we set the percentage really high, we could only have people that have the potential of like going over the world record and really creating a massive fight. This also has another advantage because it creates a greater incentive for people to push hard. Because, for example, let's say you're a 74 in the USA. It must be extremely demotivating because you know that no matter what, it is very unlikely that you will be able to go to the World Championships. However, if you know that if you just have to hit a certain number, you can go to the World Championships, I think a lot more people will be motivated and we will see the standard in powerlifting go up. So yeah, I really like this idea. However, this solution has one problem. So I'm assuming that people will be able to qualify from national competitions. So for example, British powerlifting. If they go to the British Powerlifting Championships and they lift, let's say 95% of the world record, then they will be able to go to the World Championships. The only problem is that at British Powerlifting Nationals, there are British judges. And so the British judges will obviously want more British powerlifters to be at the World Championships. And so they may start passing bad lifts in order to allow their powerlifters to go to the World Championships. And this obviously doesn't have to be the case with the current system where nations have more autonomy on who goes to the World Championships, because it doesn't matter who goes through really. Because at the end of the day, only 8 lifters are going through. And yes, some refs may have bias within the division. However, that's all going to get balanced out by the 3 judges and by the jury. So that's okay. But now there will be an incentive by the jury and all 3 refs to pass lifts to allow their national powerlifters to go to the World Championships. And this problem has a solution. What you would need to do is you need to bring in judges from different nations and then they will judge national events for a different nation. However, this may add more admin. Well, it will add a lot more admin for the IPF. The IPF will have to make sure that there isn't bias and it will just make it a lot more complicated for the IPF. And so that's why I don't know if the IPF will be willing to do that. And that's why my solution I like, because it keeps the system very similar. However, if the IPF is willing to make these changes, which I really hope that they would be willing to do because it's their job to grow the sport. So I hope that they would be willing to kind of make the sacrifices and do the admin to allow judging to be fair at national events, so that we can have a qualifying total which is set and will allow the sport to be more competitive on the highest and best stage, which is the World Championship stage. Because if, let's say, imagine an 83 kilogram class where you've got all of the top lifters. Every single lift counts throughout the whole event. And then let's say that there are maybe 2 lifters in the flight that have no chance of winning. These 2 lifters are more likely to be lifters that are doing massive numbers. We might see someone like, I don't know, Elliot Sykes in the 74s, an 18-year-old who can't win maybe because he can't beat Austin Perkins, but we would see an amazing showing from an 18-year-old. So that is my solution. I think that we can make change in the powerlifting community. We are a small community. If all of us go and say we want to see a difference in the system, the IPF might listen. And so we should push for this if they aren't willing to make these changes, because we can make a difference in this sport and we shouldn't be complacent. Like I was saying, the sport can grow. We don't have to be a small sport where we have no professional athletes. We can bring in big sponsorships. We can get big viewerships. We can do this. We just need to push for it. In strongman, Mitchell Hooper had a problem. I think he wanted the families of strongmen athletes to get free travel to the event. And within like a week of him posting a video about this, the rules were changed and he got free travel. So yeah, we can make a difference. I hope you guys understand my point. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, put it down in the comments and explain your point of view. But thank you guys so much for watching. Check out rpu10.shop and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.